This story takes place in a very small town called Elbert, Colorado, that's very far out in the middle of nowhere. Like a grocery trip, took a 45-minute drive just to get to a store. I moved out there in the summer of 2013, when I was about 11. My family lived on an 8-acre piece of property in a fairly thick pine forest, with the house just outside the very edge of it. The driveway to the house was a super crappy, super long dirt road that led out to the main street that had to be a little less than an eighth of a mile away from the house. To this day, I think that place was the most beautiful, peaceful place that I've ever gone to. The only sounds that could be heard were those of nature and our chickens, as we could not hear the rare car that would pass by. The nights were the best part about the place, though. Because of the lack of city lights, I was able to see every detail of the night sky, down to the dimmest of stars. Because of the darkness, however, you weren't able to see a single thing below the horizon of the night sky. Along with that, there were several packs of coyotes that lived out there, and every night they'd all be howling at each other. With enough of them, the noise would almost sound like water. The only thing that really sucked about the property, however, was the walk that we had to make just to take the trash out. The garbage company would only accept the cans that were brought out to the main road. We'd normally take the trash out before it got dark, but occasionally I'd forget it and would have to do it all at dark, which I normally didn't mind. The trip would normally be super peaceful to walk it out, and we had headlamps at the ready so that we could actually see where we were going in the dark. Well, the summer before I moved out, there was a night where I forgot to take out the trash during the day, and the batteries on the headlamps were dead. This meant I had to try to navigate my own way down our driveway, almost completely blind. I went outside and stood next to the trash cans for a minute or two, staring into the darkness in order to hopefully adjust my eyes. Staring into the darkness, though, I felt like there was something off. The normal coyote sound was gone, and for some reason, my eyes would just not adjust to the darkness. I kept staring into the abyss, looking for any sign that my eyes might be adjusting, but to no luck. Then, this terrible feeling tore its way into my chest. The best way that I can describe it is as if this darkness, this abyss that I was staring into, was staring back. No, into me. I was frozen with fear. I knew I was alone out there, but something told me that if I were to walk into the darkness, I would not be returning. I continued staring, but almost unable to look away from the darkness for a long time, before my mom came out to check on me. Her opening the door seemed to break me out of my trance, and I ran to her and started crying. She looked at me confused and noticed that I still hadn't taken out the trash. After telling her what I felt, she laughed a little and gave me some encouraging words, telling me that if there was anything out there, our dogs would have surely noticed it by now. She then told me to come back in 10 minutes for ice cream. I turned back around and walked back to our trash cans, shaking. I had never been so scared in my life. And what of nothing? I chuckled to myself, realizing the absurdity of it. When I took my eyes back off the ground, the chuckle turned back into a cry. I realized that I wasn't scared of nothing. I was terrified that there was something out there that I could not see, waiting for me to leave the light of the house lamp to attack. Then, the coyote started, and my eyes started adjusting. Whatever might have been out there was gone, along with all of my fear. The tears stopped along with most of the fear, and I was able to start dragging the trash cans down. The walk was somewhat scary, though I was able to let the sound of the coyotes distract me. By the time I got back up to my house, I felt safe again, but I could not stop thinking about that dark abyss. While I lived at the house, that was probably my scariest encounter. There were other scarier encounters while I was there, but the only one could even slightly relate to the others takes place at a friend's house. For the sake of privacy, I'll refer to this friend as D. D had a property that was about 10 minutes from mine, and we shared the same forest, with the only separation being a road in between us. We had been hanging out for a while that day, playing a bunch of video games, when I had an idea to go out in the dark and explore his property. He agreed, and so we waited until night fell. After a few more hours of video games and dinner, it finally seemed dark enough to go out, so we did. We were wandering his 7-acre property, being pretty stupid, loud, and making half-assed attempts at trying to get at each other, a little scared. After some time of this, we eventually wandered into a clearing, and I just guess the attempts settled in for both of us. At the same time, we looked around, concerned. There was something off, and it felt like we were being watched. Trying to keep a good mood, and maybe trying to keep my mind off whatever was making us feel this way, I suggested we make a scary video to scare little D's brother. D laughed and agreed, and pulled out his phone and started recording. We were acting like we kept seeing things in the woods. I would throw a stick when the camera was facing away, make a weird grunting noise, and anything and such to make the video creepier. We both were having a good time. However, deep down, I felt like something was very off, and I think that he did too. Then, out of nowhere, a twig snapped behind us. I automatically assumed that D had thrown something, but when I looked at him to confirm, he was looking at me to see if I had thrown it. Now, before this moment, I was trying very hard to make my voice sound as scared as possible for the video. However, as soon as I heard this, I didn't need to try anymore. We stared in the direction that the twig snap came from for a second, hoping to make something out, but to no avail. Once again, my eyes would not adjust to the darkness, except this time, instead of physically standing in the light, I was inside of the darkness. Partially for the video, and partially for my sanity, I whispered, "Run." D nodded slightly, his face illuminated by his phone, and we started sprinting in the direction of his house. I don't think I had ran so hard in my life beforehand, but there was a feeling in my gut still telling me that we weren't fast enough, that we needed to hide. D must have felt the same thing. He took the lead and led us to a nearby cat shed. A motion sensor light flicked on as we passed by, and we got in the shed as quickly as we could. After getting the door shut, D turned on his light, revealing the inside of the shed. At the time, it seemed to me like the cats were hiding from something. However, looking back on it, they were probably just sleeping in their beds that were in a corner of the shed. This freaked me out even more. D stated climbing the wall of the shed and led us out onto almost a shelf-like structure that had a window that we could look out of. D sat on one side of the window, and I sat on the other, so that we were facing each other and we could see both angles from the window. Eventually, with the light on outside and the added comfort of a roof over our head, we started to calm down, and the focus on the video became apparent. As we were talking about what might have been out there, the motion sensor light turned off, dropping the outside back into the dark. We went quiet as the uneasy feeling washed over us again. To me, it didn't feel like we were being watched anymore, more like we were being looked for. We started intently at looking out the window, looking for signs of anything, when I thought I started hearing footsteps. Having a wall between us and the steps muffled them, so I couldn't be sure what I was hearing. I asked D about them, and he said that he had heard them too. However, I'm pretty sure he was saying that for the video. We went quiet again, listening. Then I heard the footsteps get slightly louder. One of the cats starts rubbing up against us, which distracted us and caused us to turn around and start petting him. Because who wouldn't pet a cat? As we were petting him, the outdoor motion sensor light flicked on. I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms to my face as we slowly turned around. We looked out the window and saw nothing. D told me that we should get inside, and I agreed with him. We carried the cat back down to its bed and got ready to make a 50-yard sprint directly to his house. He opened the door, I shut it, and then we were in the cold, dark woods, running as hard as we could from whatever turned on that light. After what felt like forever sprinting, we finally got to D's front door and we rushed inside. We slammed his sliding glass door and didn't sleep until we saw the sun rising the next morning. Though these encounters were terrifying at the time, a lot of it can be easily explained by me just freaking myself out. There was nothing out there during the trash can story, and at Dee's house, we found raccoon prints the next morning outside of the cat shed. None of these things ever stopped me from loving the woods, and within a week, I was certain that I was just making things up to myself. I continued loving the woods, and we lived for the next year. Though these encounters were terrifying at the time, a lot of it can be easily explained by me just freaking myself out. There was nothing out there during the trash can story, and at Dee's house, we found raccoon prints the next morning, outside of the cat shed. None of these things ever stopped me from loving the woods, and within a week, I was certain that I was just making things up to myself. I continued loving the woods. We lived for the next year that we lived there, but eventually, my family and I ended up moving out. My dad got a job offer in Minnesota that would improve our financial situation and not force my dad to a 2-hour commute every day. Minnesota, however, proved to be the worst place that I have lived in, at least for the first year or two. After living in such a small town and adapting to my friends in Elbert so much, I found it very hard to make any friends in Minnesota. I was constantly thinking about my friends and the girlfriend I had left in Elbert, and refused to work to make friends, and the people at my new school didn't particularly seem to like me. I would still talk to my other friends almost every night, playing video games and stuff with them, which was almost the only thing that seemed to make me any sort of happy while I was out there. With my mental health in the garbage can, and my lack of any friends, my parents agreed to let me go out to Elbert during the summer and visit. After the first visit, my mental health was way better, and I started opening up to other people at the new school as well. So, my parents agreed to make the Elbert trips annual, as long as I planned them. So, every year since then, I've been visiting my friends in Elbert. The most recent visit is the reason that I'm writing this. Every year I would hang out with my friends who I'll call K, T, and D. The same D from the story I just told you. Because of stupid teenager drama, they would almost never hang out together. One of my favorite things to do with them was, ironically, go squatching. For those that don't know, squatching is looking for Bigfoot, typically making their hypothetical calls and using other communication methods of theirs in hope to find one. This was simply an excuse to go yell in the forest at night for me. This most recent visit, I had finally managed to get K, T, and D to all hang out together. We had planned on making a short film that was based on these stupid videos that T and I used to make. We ended up trying to film it, but ended up with like one scene before we decided to just play video games instead. Well, one day after dinner, the group came up with an idea to make a squatching video. T, K, and I filmed one last year, so we figured that we would do another one this year to try and make this an annual thing. We took K's little brother out with us to film, and we started recording our video. The sun was still up, so it had no intention of being any sort of scary or funny ironic video. We wandered around for an hour or so, making shitty Australian accents and shouting for Bigfoot, when Kay had the idea that we could split up and look for Sasquatch. So we did. We each went off on our own way in the woods, with the cameraman following me, each making the occasional squatch call and tree knock. We had some walkie-talkies with us, so we were able to tell each other when we were making a call. After some time, D, T, and I found each other and decided to group up and meet K up in a clearing. We started walking, and K came in over the radio, saying that he was about to make a call. We waited, and then from the forest came the most terrifying noise I have ever heard somebody make. The best way that I could describe it was like a dying elephant that had a smoking problem. Then, he came in over the radio. "Was that you guys?" he asked. We assumed that he was just joking around for the video, so we joked back. "No, mate, we've pissed the squatch off. We need to get out of here. Meet us back at your house." And we ran out of the forest quickly when we met up with Kay. He apparently had cut himself on some barbed wire, and that, plus the terrifying scream we heard him make earlier, seemed to put us off. So we decided to stop for the time being. We went inside and played Halo for hours, messing with each other and doing other stupid stuff, not mentioning what had happened while squatching the rest of the night. When night had more than passed, and it was around midnight, we decided to go back outside and continue squatching, this time without a camera and a bunch of flashlights. We decided to go pretty deep into the forest before not making any calls, as to not wake Kay's family and neighbors up. Eventually, we got to the point that we had to split up from earlier and had to decide what to do. After talking about it some, we decided to see where Kay had run off to. Then I made the first squatch call of the night. After the call, the woods went completely silent. In my previous story, I talked about the abyss watching me. This was almost the same, except it felt as if the forest were listening to us. We laughed about it, poked fun at each other, trying to creep one another out, and started walking. Kay led us pretty deep into his woods, and eventually stopped in a small opening, showing us that this had been where he had radioed us from before the call. The thing is, Kay didn't refer to the call as his. He referred to it as one of ours. This didn't register at the moment, but thinking back on it, definitely gives me the creeps. After a bit more joking around, Kay decided to take us to the boundary of his property, where he had cut himself. We walked in a straight line, toward the fence, and I think Kay figured we'd follow the fence to where he cut himself. As we walked deeper into the forest, though, our jokes started to die down. The silence, darkness, and this feeling started to get to us. We were starting to suspect that we were being watched. We arrived at the fence and started walking along when Kay stopped, confused. I looked at where his flashlight was pointing, and there was a fence. However, the fence was almost dented, if that makes any sense. It looked like something had come through and simply stepped on the fence with enough weight that the fence couldn't bring itself to its natural position. I shined my flashlight into the other property and asked Kay about it. I can't remember exactly what he told me, but I think I remember him saying it was a large piece of property owned by Native American land and had once been sacred or something like that. That was probably terribly wrong, so take that information with a grain of salt. Our group looked at each other. "Let's go over it," I remember myself saying. "Worst case scenario, we find whosever property it is, and we could tell him about the broken gate." This was obviously not the worst case scenario, especially out in the country like this, but we continued anyway. After going through some pretty heavy woods, we found a clearing, and then we felt something awful. The hair on the back of all of our necks stood up at once, and we started hearing twig snaps in every which direction. This was a massive change from the previously quiet forest that we had just been walking through. We quickly shined our lights every which way, looking for anything that could be causing our fear, when Dee's light stopped on something. "Guys, do you see that?" We all shined our lights on the spot that he was looking at. I couldn't see anything at first and was about to say no when I made out what looked like a reflection of eyes. We each confirmed, one by one, each of us starting to make out the eyes. Then we did something stupid. We started walking toward it. Maybe this was because there were 4 of us and 1 pair of eyes. Or maybe it was how luring they looked. But every step we took, the more they faded out, until we couldn't see them anymore. Then, we felt the hairs of the back of our necks stand up even more than ever, as if pointing in the direction of something that did not approve of us being there. We stood back to back, making a square, as we felt the presence circling us. "Guys, let's get out of here," one of the group members said. We all nodded and waited, and then when we felt the time was right, we sprinted. We all ran as fast as we could, jumping over the fallen fence, through the forest, and until eventually I saw the house. I heard the others run by me, hidden by the forest, when suddenly I stopped. "Ryan, help!" My heart sank. I had just heard the other three run by me, yet this was the perfect voice of Kay, calling for my help. I shoved the thought that this could be Kay out of my head. After all, I had just heard all three of my friends run by me. I began sprinting again, hoping to catch up with Kay. After sprinting for a minute or two, I caught up with them, beginning to slow down, almost at the house. I caught up with Kay and was about to try to talk to him when we both flinched backward, almost falling. Just to the right of us, there was a crashing thud of something that had just hit the ground. We quickly recovered and sprinted in toward the door, urging the others on. When we finally got back to Kay's house, we slammed the door behind us and had to just rest, panting, when we all seemed to calm down. Kay asked what the hell happened out there. We all went around and shared what they saw. D said he saw the reflection of eyes, and more than what was just in the clearing. Kay said he saw the reflection of eyes in the clearing and heard the two thuds that freaked us both out. T said he might have seen the eyes in the clearing and some yellow-red ones as we're closing the door. I stated what I saw, but decided to leave out the voice since I wasn't, and am still not sure I heard what I heard. We sat down and almost immediately started searching up cryptids, looking for all other possible stories like ours. Within half an hour, our primary theories were of a goatman, a Jersey devil, and possibly a Wendigo. Almost in response to our theories, we had heard two ever-so-quiet footsteps on the roof. Eventually, we got to sleep, but after that, we never spoke a word of it again. Maybe a year or so later, I was trying to creep myself out when I found a story about Wendigos. These stories sounded familiar to my experience, but didn't seem to be quite right. Well, that led into a rabbit hole, and eventually, I learned about skinwalkers. Since then, I've loved hearing stories about them, and am very fascinated with what they are and how they hunt. I've stopped believing recently, however. After rethinking my tale for the 100th time, I'm 90% sure that what we heard and saw was just a horse that we got onto the bad side of, which is oddly common, I guess. What really spooks me, however, is when I let the 10% wonder and think that it might have been something paranormal. Either way, I don't understand how Kay still lives on that property. I'll be visiting him this summer, so I'll see them again, but hopefully we won't encounter whatever we might have last time.